Okay, just to let everybody know, we have some wonderful BPS swag up here in the front. We got pens and stickers, so make sure to help yourself to one and some for your family before you head out today. Most of you are probably here thinking, aren't we talking about screwdrivers and software? And what is this dude with a life vest up here? Well, my good friend Pete is running the community forum over there. And like any good friend, when you come into embarrassing photos of them, you make a spectacle. And so that's exactly what this is here. So make sure to say hi to Pete when you see him and ask him how his swimming adventure went.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us right after lunch. We'll try to be entertaining so that the heads don't start to nod too much. So that screwdriver at the top there is what you get if you buy a keyboard from Keyboardio. So some people know Jesse Vincent. He runs a keyboard business now. So we thought this would be a good theme to bring over into your Perl projects. So go ahead. So we're Best Practical. That's what the BPS that Jason referred to, if you wondered what that was. We make Request Tracker and Request Tracker for incident response. So this is what powers rt.cpan.org. So if you haven't used it before, and it's just a general issue and ticket tracking application, all in Perl. This is Jason. I'm Jim. And we're going to be taking you through some of the ways that we do configuration. So we're using RT as the example, but this is the problem. And you might have this problem with your projects as well. So you have some open source software and it's pretty good. It does mostly everything that you want, but there's a couple of little parts that you need to tweak, right? It's not exactly what you need. So then you start to think, okay, how can I do this? Oh, it's open source. I've got the code. I'll just go change it, right? Problem solved. And the problem is solved until there's a new version that comes out of whatever that was. And this could be a library. This could be a whole application. It could be anything that you've grabbed that's versioned, right? So now you have a decision to make. What are you going to do now that you have locally modified code, but there's a new version that you have to put on top of it? So, you can't easily just drop that new version in because then your changes are gone, right? So you could diff everything and try to get maybe something like a patch and then try to reapply that. But then, maybe you just hope that they didn't touch the files that you touched, right? Maybe you'll just get lucky and nothing got changed. Or probably the worst case, you just say, yeah, I know there's a new version out, but it's going to mess up all these changes that I made. So I'm just going to stick on this old version that I have forever, right? I see some people nodding, right? This is the decision that you have. And that's fine, right? You don't need any new features, right? You're set with the version that you have. It's all good until you see in the changelog fixed major security bug. And then you're like, okay, now I have a problem, right? First problem is there was a security bug. Second problem was I read that and now I can't unread it. So there's a security bug and I know about it. And so now I'm responsible. So these are the problems that you can run into with any software that you download. But again, with open source, you think I can just go change things, but then you kind of get yourself in a rough situation. The other side to think about this is as developers, as your own code, right? So someone else could be in this situation with your code and then not upgrading and things. So as we go through this stuff, you can kind of think of it from both sides. So the solution is, again, from the developer side is as much as you can, make it possible to extend and modify your software without actually having to go in and touch the actual files. And there's lots of different ways to do that. So Perl itself as a language gives you different tools that makes it really flexible. So there's a couple of things that we're going to show there. And again, we're going to use RT as the example, but this is stuff that the idea is you can think about this for any of the different projects that you might work on. And for anything that you publish and you say, this is a way you can modify things, what you want to think about is backward compatibility. Like basically be nice once you've published something and said, this is a clean way to modify things. Don't change that, right? Because that's the whole point, is that people can upgrade and their stuff continues to work. So this is our world, meaning that for RT, all of the things we're going to show you, Jason and I use these tools every day when we do like custom code for customers and things like that. When people want, I want RT to do this thing. We use all of the things, literally every technique we're going to show you, we use in one way or another. So we know that all of these actually work. And there's just different times when one is sort of more useful than another. So all of these on the slide right now, these are all the different ways. This is an all, but this is the ones that, typically that we recommend, the ways that you can modify RT without actually going in and changing the actual files. Meaning, if you use any of these and you put customization in, you make it work the way you want, you can still upgrade and you're not going to lose all those customizations. They'll continue to run. So we're going to go through all of these and talk about how these might work for you and how they work in RT and how people can use those and how we use them to make things run differently without messing with things. So starting off simple, command line. So there are some command line tools that you can use with RT. There's an application bin RT, which is like a little command line client that you can run. And when you use any kind of command line thing, environment variables are a very convenient way in your shell just to set things to sort of modify the behavior. There's lots of Perl modules that have this as well. Again, not just RT. So just as one example, the crypt SSL module has a way you can go in and when you look in the docs, there's a couple of, again, published documented environment variables that you can set. In this case, you can tell it what class because it can actually choose from a couple of different SSL classes. So it's a way you can modify the behavior of that module. It will act differently depending on how you set that environment variable. So very nice. It's very loosely coupled. So it's a very convenient way to expose to let people change things. So RT has some examples like this. And the simple ones are if you're using like I said, the bin RT command, there you can set things like the RT user and password, and that's just what the bin RT command is going to use when it logs into the RT that you want to connect to and do things with. And Jason's got some examples of like what that looks like when you run it. There we go.
Totally not secure or professional, but
yep. You get the idea. So it just drops into a shell, and then the RT shell, you can just do things like you can show a ticket, you can modify tickets, you can just list all the tickets or whatever. So again, just command line stuff that you can do with environment variables. So that's sort of configuration. And then there's also ways that you can modify the behavior so that it actually behaves differently based on environment variables. So in this case, we're just going to set a debug that you can run, and it's just going to give you a bunch more information when you go through and run the utility. So you can see up at the top here, now you got a bunch of headers, a bunch of extra information is being output, right? So saying, set the debug level to this other level, and it's going to actually modify how the bin RT utility runs when it does things. So that's environment variables, really easy way to do configuration. And again, very convenient, very loosely coupled. You don't really need to know as much about the application. You just need to know the name of the environment variable, right? That's pretty much what it is. And then valid values. What does it accept that you can set? There's another example that we have where we have something you could use on the command line, but then it's also something that is, we'll talk about later, some configuration options that are right inside of RT. So in this case, we have a database query timeout, which is basically a timer for how long you want to let a query to run before you just say, you're not returning, so stop. In the case of RT, you might want to have one setting for your web application, right? Because you don't want people to sit there and spin in the browser forever. But in a command line, you might actually have a utility that you're running that maybe it is going to run for a long time. You have a query that you just know, and it's fine. It's a command line thing. No one's waiting for it, and you just want to let it run. So in this case, you can use an environment variable to actually override the core setting that you've set in RT so that one command line utility that you have can run longer. So you can kind of combine different techniques of setting configuration so that you can handle more use cases, right? And again, a lot of the stuff, everything we're going to show today is a use case that we've actually had. So we had this issue where we introduced this new configuration option. We set it for the web portion of it, and then some of the command line stuff was timing out incorrectly. So we set an environment variable so that you could easily override that. RC files, I think everyone's pretty familiar with these. If you do Linux, Unix, this is something you use. All sorts of different utilities have this kind of thing, and bin RT also uses this. It's got a long history, so there's things you can go look at. Generally, when I use stuff like this, I just try to go look at what other utilities do and just kind of go with the flow. Like we don't invent our own way of doing things. So just a simple RC that you can set up with, again, basically the same variables that we showed before. I think, and also it takes like the URL of the RT that you want to connect to. But Jason can just show that. Yeah. So it's just a basic RT RC file. So another way to set configuration, again, very obviously command line focused, where you can set and override behavior. So other configuration. that you can set up. Regular configuration files. So this gets into sort of the next layer up, not like a command line utility, but like an actual application that you have. So RT has dozens and dozens of different configuration options that you can set in a configuration file to just modify the behavior of the application. Some of them are just needed just to make RT run, like where's the database, how do I connect to it, what's the database password, things like that. And then there's a whole ton that just modify how it's going to behave. And these can be features that you can turn on and off. Different behaviors, things that you can fine tune. All of these are exposed in a documented, clear sort of way that you can, in a supported way, right? So all these things that are in here are ways that we say these will work. As long as you set these in these ways, it will do what you expect. So I don't know if do you have an example of the... So this is what a file looks like, a typical, we'll call a site config file because it's the config for your site. So you can see sort of the different, we have a function that you call set. You don't need to know that that's a function. So if you're a user who's not super technical, you just kind of copy the other examples. But you can see all the different ways that you can set different types of values in the application. So there's some that are, basic sort of flags, just turn things on and off, ones and zeros. You can see other ones, they just accept some sort of a string that, modifies that behavior or sets how it's going to run. And you can see we get into more complex ones. This is an actual Perl file, so we can kind of use all of the different data structures that are available to Perl, so really flexible for us as developers. We can do things like use a hash down here, which allows for really complicated sort of configurations to be put together and defined in a kind of a terse, dense sort of format. And I think there's also, there's an array example here too. So pretty much every data structure in Perl we use for sort of different types of things. So again, clearly documented, supported ways to modify the behavior. And again, you haven't touched any code in RT to do, make potentially fairly big changes in the way RT works. So we're talking about like RT is obviously an application that you download. So many different people grab it and they install it and they set it up and run it. But if you have, if you work on an application that's like, say, just for your company, so you just have one code base and you just deploy to production and it's just for you. I've worked at a couple of different places that do this kind of thing, even though they're the only consumer of the application, right? They don't distribute it, but they do put in things called, and I've heard it called like feature flags and things like that, where there's configuration that drives the application, even though it's internal. And the advantage of that is that sometimes it depends on your release process. It might be easier to deploy a change to production if it's a configuration change, because that's something that's not considered a code change. So for certain types of behaviors, you may want to have ways that you can turn things on and off in production without doing a full code deploy. And a lot of people do continuous deployment now, so maybe the idea of a code change isn't as scary as it once was, but still people generally feel better about configuration changes. So again, even if you're not distributing something like RT and you just have, your one customer is the production that you deploy to, building in little configuration flags can be a useful technique to be able to turn things on and off that you want to do. Even things like debugging and things like that, right? You might want to have a way to turn on additional logging if you're trying to track down a problem, but then you turn it off for normal running. So some of these techniques are good for whatever kind of code that you work on. So these are just some more examples of what we saw in the config file. This one's actually, it says array, but it's actually an array ref. So before someone raises their hand, yeah. So there's a hash. So when you think about modules, right? So this is configuration for RT, but when you think about modules, typically the constructors are kind of the configuration for the object. And then often there's methods you can call as well, right? Where you can kind of turn things on and off if you've already got the object and you say, I want to sort of change this behavior. So here's an example with net LDAP, which is something that RT uses, where when you create the LDAP object, you pass it a bunch of things to say, where's the LDAP server that I want to connect to? What's the scheme that we want to use? And in some cases, what we do where we have modules that we basically are leveraging the module. So when RT connects to LDAP or Active Directory, we actually have a base set that you can set with explicit values to make it a little bit easier for users when they're setting things up. But then sometimes we have an additional item where it's basically just values we're just going to pass right through to the constructor of the object. And the benefit of this is if net LDAP adds some kind of new feature, RT doesn't necessarily have to know about it, right? Like we don't have to put out, go do an update and then put out a new version for that feature to work. You can come in and actually add that to the args and it just gets passed through the constructor. And as long as you have the new version of net LDAP, it'll just work. So in this case with LDAP, we have a mix. There's some where we actually explicitly ask for the value that we're going to set in the code. But then for this particular one, again, you can just just go to the net LDAP page, any of those we just pass through and it'll change the behavior of the underlying object that gets created. So we kind of use both techniques there. So that's basic sort of setup of behavior and configuration for RT. One of the really common things that people want to do is just the appearance, right? So RT is a web application. So people want to go in and they say, I want it to look different. Simple things like colors or fonts or things like that you want to do. So if you have an application that does something like this, it's nice to make this simple stuff easy. So that's what we do in RT. So you don't even really need to know CSS. We have this page inside the system configuration where you can go in and mess with some of the typical parts of the page. So we kind of have them broken up so that there's different parts of what sort of make up the different bits in RT. And you can just go in, use the color wheel, and you don't actually have to know any CSS to go in and change things. You can also upload your logo up here. We are actually changing the CSS over in this box. So we try to provide like kind of a ramp, right? So if you do know some CSS, it's right there. And so you can go in or maybe if you're just, you're willing to go search on Stack Overflow and learn some CSS enough to get this changed, we're actually making the changes right in this box over here. So you can come in and maybe use these tools to get the sort of the rough idea of what's getting changed, but then you can go in and do the fine grain change right there, and by modifying the CSS that's right in the box right there. And this is right in the web interface, so you don't have to go and log into the command line interface and actually change a file or anything like that. It's all exposed to the user right in the web interface. So that's kind of convenient. Another nice thing we do is reset. So if you have configuration options that you expose through like a web interface and there's enough to kind of let the user get themselves in trouble, it's nice to have effectively an undo button, right? Like, oh my God, what have I done? And you can just put it back. We also have in newer versions of RT, you can all of those settings that we showed before is also, you can modify them through the web interface as well. So they're all available, again, just for configuration. So if you go up to the edit, so all of those are available here as well. And same thing, we have a reset. So it's kind of the undo button. It's like, I don't know what I did here. I think I broke my RT, put it back to the way it was. So we have a way for it to allow people to get out from that. So if you have something where you might have, again, not like a config file, but you have people that can go into an interface and maybe get themselves in trouble, it's nice to have a way for them to put it back to the way it was so that things can get restored. So that's the basic theme tools, but often you do get people who know some CSS and they want to make much bigger changes. And we also, again, provide sort of, again, the ramp up is, if you have the capabilities, we like to make the tools available. You can go into RT and you can tell it, hey, I have my own style sheet. This is where it is. And you would do this in some code. We're getting into where you would actually write some code to do this. And you say, please load that when you're setting up, when RT is setting up, and then all the stuff that you define in there will then be available. So this is if you're going to get into much bigger changes than you want to do in that little box that we showed before, RT provides a way to pull that in. And again, we're saying RT and all this stuff, but this is for you to think about your projects. Like, are there ways that I could expose something so that people could put stuff in? So again, if you do any kind of a web application, provide a way for them to load their own CSS rather than saying, well, you could load, personal CSS in your browser, which is true, but then not every user gets it. So it's nice to have a way that they can kind of load that stuff. And there's documentation for how to do that, like, the rules, what's going to get loaded, where it's going to get loaded, and all that kind of stuff, so that you can have a good idea of what's going on. So think about web applications. The next thing that people mostly want to do when they're looking at the web application, especially if you have someone who has some development experience, maybe they don't know anything about RT or Perl or anything like that, but they're looking at RT, they're a user of it, and they might, open up the developer tools and be like, wow, if I could, get some JavaScript in here, I can make this do what I want. And I think everyone here knows that JavaScript is pretty powerful for a web application. You can make stuff disappear, you can make new things appear, you can kind of do anything you want to a page. So we also make that available. Similar kind of hook. You go in and say, hey, I've got a file here. Load this JavaScript when you run, and then you can go in there and just write whatever it is that you want to do. Put selectors in, figure out where you want stuff to run, and put custom behavior right in there. And again, we just provide the hooks to allow people to load that kind of stuff. So we're just grabbing an example here. So here's an example, just a simple file where we just have just a jQuery. RT uses jQuery, and just to show that you can pull in from any file that you have. And again, you can do anything to these pages, but it's very easy to load some custom JavaScript. I think there it is. So just shows, we just popped in that one file. We told RT, hey, I've got this custom JavaScript file. Please load this. It loads it, and now you're running that. So that is often enough for people to do the things that they need to do a lot of sort of visual changes right in the web interface. And then they don't need to really dig into the RT internals. So again, mission accomplished that they didn't have to go modify the core RT code. Put all that stuff together. If you want to do deeper sort of changes, you can actually create extensions in RT, and we'll talk about a little more later, sort of wrapping this stuff up. But you can use the CSS and the JavaScript to completely change how everything in RT looks. So this is much more than just changing the colors like we saw before, but we provide the tools to create an extension where you can completely change it. So we've got an example of something that looks, you've seen some RT, this is sort of the regular default RT, but if you go in, we've loaded a different theme that's available on CPAN. So you can see you can do a very different look for all of RT, right? So this is just in an extension that basically has a bunch of CSS and JavaScript in it. So again, all things that do not modify the core RT code. So all this is done on the side in a separate thing that you can download and install, and you can upgrade RT, and it's all fine. That stuff doesn't change. Yeah, and that's the example of the terminal theme. You can see all the guts of it there. Okay, so you've gotten through all of those, you've tried all of those, and you're like, nope, I can't do the thing that I want to do with all those things that are there. I really do need to go in and modify something in RT. So now we go to the code, right? We're just going to go change RT. No, there's other techniques when you get to that next layer down to, again, just allow it so that you don't have to go in and actually directly change any code. So from the perspective of just triggering behavior and having things happen. So RT is a ticketing system. Very often people have like these workflows where something's going to change in RT. I want something else to happen. There's just a built-in interface in RT that allows you to, for every change that happens on a ticket, there's a transaction recorded, and that fires off, think of it like an event. And you can hook that event and then have anything else happen that you want to happen in RT. So it's a very clean way to allow people to automate a whole bunch of things as part of their workflows. And this is just a standard part of RT that's just exposed to super users, people who can go in and do this kind of thing. And they're basically constituted of a condition, an action, and then if it's a notification, there's a template, like if it's going to send an email. But typically, condition and action. If the condition is true, go do the action. And what those are is they're just Perl code. So anything you can do in Perl, you can trigger from scripts right in RT. So this is an example. These are all the scripts. Some of these, or most of these, I think are the default ones that we get, but we've got a couple in here that Jason has set up that are doing some custom things. So this is what the page looks like. And you can just select from these what that condition is. And again, the condition is really like any state that might be on the ticket, anything that you can go look at. So there's sort of full introspection. And you can just say what's going on here. And then if that thing is true, so on owner change, if the owner is changing, then do the thing. And then these are all the different actions that you can pick from there. So again, just exposing a way for people to go in and do whatever their custom behavior is. We don't know what they're going to do, but there's a clean way for them to go in and do that. Now, there's actually a mode. So the previous ones that Jason was showing were different ones that are in the dropdown, right? So these are ones that already have code, and you pick from there, and it just does the thing that it has. We also have a user-defined option. And when you pick that, you can actually just drop straight up Perl code right in the boxes down below. So again, easy way for people to go in. They know a little bit of Perl, or they can just go do some searches and they can get the code to drop in here. So custom condition, we expose the ticket objects and transaction objects to you so that we give those to the user. They can look and see what the value is of something at any given time. And then you just return 1 or 0, and that's whether it's true or false. And then similar with the actions. So not strictly configuration, but it is clear it's behavior that you want to trigger in RT that's very custom based on a certain set of circumstances. And all this, again, no changes to RT. This is a supported interface. It's just going to run whatever it is that you put there. So this doesn't involve anything that people have to do. And this is where we get into the parts where we talked about keeping things consistent for your exposed interfaces. So for example, making sure that the objects that are exposed here are the same. So if you upgrade RT, we didn't just change like what the ticket object is and the methods that are available on that ticket object. So your scripts don't break when you upgrade versions of RT. So we try to be very diligent about making sure that, stuff that people wrote, even from RTs from like years ago, continue to run, because all of the sort of the contract that we had, the stuff that we exposed continues to work the way that they expect. So that's scripts. Portlets are basically the little boxes that you see on the different pages within RT. So there's also a way, if you just want to have your own little custom thing that you want to drop on a page, either with custom behavior, or maybe you want to do like an integration, you want to pull in some extra information and just show it on an RT page. All sorts of different reasons that people might want to drop some HTML onto a page in RT. There's also a clean interface to do that. And we call those portlets. And what you can do then is there's a configuration option where you go in and that's how you register these portlets. So once you've written one, you can just go in and tell RT about it. Like, hey, there's this extra thing, make this available to people so that they can go in and modify things. So there's an example. So quick calls is an extension. So that's something that someone wrote as an extension. And all it is it just creates a new portlet. So once you install the quick calls extension and then go put it in and tell RT about it, when you go into RT, it's now available to any of the users that come in. They go up and modify their page. There's a quick calls portlet that's now available right there. There it is. Right. So extension, you install the extension, you go tell RT about it, and now it's available to end users and they can just drop that in. Again, all of this is not modifying any code in RT, but there's completely new behavior that's available through this extension that's just using these extension mechanisms that, again, have not modified anything in core RT. So this is a way to do things in the user interface. And that's what it looks like. So RT uses Mason. So there's some details that you go through here as far as obviously you have to learn a little bit about Mason. Most of it's just straight up HTML you can see in here, and then there's some other details. But really, this is the extent of that extension. Really, this is the guts of it. This is all that's there. It's basically one screen of code, and it allows you to drop that new portlet onto the page. So, and we have documentation for that so that users know how to go in and do all that kind of stuff. And then RT provides the context in the environment. So you've got like a logged in user. You've got all the details with the menuing. There's all that stuff that you don't have to do. Really, you can just focus on whatever it is that you want to do. So all that's made available to you when you do the portlets. So there's all this stuff that's just in the environment that's just available to you. Really powerful thing, and we use these all the time. Is there's a callback mechanism in RT. So now you're getting into like, great, portlet's fine. I can add this new thing over here. But really what I want to do is I want to mess with something that's existing on a given page. I want to go in and change the behavior of that. So the tool that we have for that are callbacks. And there's really two ways that these get used. So these are scattered throughout all of the Mason templates that we have. And the way Mason templates work is there's a first section that basically runs some code to set up your page. Like you go call the database and you fetch stuff and you get it. And then the second phase of it is it's just HTML. You put all of your HTML in there and then you display your page and you can put dynamic stuff. So we have callbacks in both of those phases. So you can put stuff in the code portion where you can go in and then you can modify behavior by basically what the callback will do. It's kind of like a subroutine call. When it gets to that callback, it goes and looks. And if you don't have anything there, it's just a no-op. It just doesn't do anything. But if you've actually put a callback file there, it's going to call your callback. It's going to call your code. It's going to pass you a handful of variables or arguments. And then you can do things in your callback to go in and potentially modify how that page is going to behave. So what we do in almost all of the parameters that we pass in these callbacks are by reference, so that you can actually change the value in your callback. And then when it comes back, the rest of the code that keeps going is now going to reference your new value that you've changed. So it makes it really easy to just throw in a little bit of logic to just change a behavior. And it can be very conditional. It can be like, if this is the case and it's this page and this queue and this user, then change this value. And now when it goes back and continues the rest of the page, that value is changed. So you can modify a lot of behavior through those different callback points. So here's an example, just a really simple one, where we have something called a drop-down limit. So we've got a value inside of RT where you can modify how many items should be in a dropdown before it will automatically turn into an autocomplete, right? Because once a dropdown gets to be whatever, 50 items, it's not very useful anymore. But that's something that many people want to be able to modify, right? Because they're like, okay, our dropdown just got to 51, but people don't like the autocomplete because they don't know the values. So we still want a dropdown. So we provide hooks that they can go in and you can change that value so that you can, they can just go set it to 55 and it won't turn into the autocomplete. So that's just one example, but there's callbacks all throughout the code that do that kind of thing. Did you change the dropdown? Is that what you're trying to find? Yeah. So here's an example that was a dropdown, but now it's turned into an autocomplete. And that was just by modifying that dropdown limit. So that's just one example of just tons of stuff that are throughout the application that by using one of those callbacks, you can modify that. And that callback, again, is sitting outside of the core RT tree. So you're not modifying code, you're adding your own bit of code that RT is then going to call. Again, think about it like basically a subroutine call, all of which are kind of empty until you define something, and you can change the behavior in there. And then the other, so that's when you're in code and you want to modify that. The other type is where we're up in the HTML section and you want to modify how a page looks. You can use a callback to go in and just basically, it's something as simple as just putting raw HTML, and wherever that callback is, that's where it's going to show up on the page. So typically we've placed callbacks at sort of strategic locations. So if it's in an existing portlet, it'll be like at the bottom of the portlet. So you're still inside the box, but you're after all of the content. So often there's a callback at the bottom, there's a callback at the top, like just places where you'd want to drop your extra little thing. And again, many of these callbacks are from things that Jason and I have done for a customer where they're like, we want something right there. So a callback is born. Like we put a callback in and then we can put custom code for that customer in that particular spot. So if you're following what Jason did there, is he dropped in using a callback, just some HTML, and there's a callback on this page right at this location in the code in the HTML. And he just dropped in that HTML, and then it just shows up on the page. And again, it's in this separate file. And the path rules are a little bit complicated. I'm not going to get into that. But basically, it's a custom file that we dropped into this local directory that, again, outside the RT tree, just your stuff. This is just yours, just custom to you. Again, you have not modified RT. But when you go to the page, your stuff is there. And if you upgrade RT, your stuff will continue to be there. Again, the whole sort of theme, the whole goal of it. So if callbacks don't quite do it for you, or there's something that you need to modify that's actually core in like the lib files. So RT's got a whole bunch of lib files, just like a regular Perl module would. So if you have behavior in there that you need to modify, you say, there's a method in here and it's doing a thing and I need to change that, right? So you're thinking, surely now we have to go in and modify something that sort of fundamental. But there's another mechanism that you can use so that you can override just an individual function or method without having to go in and modify the core code directly or having to like copy the entire file. So we call this an overlay mechanism. And what you do is say the file that you want to modify is librrt ticket.pm, which is kind of the driver of tickets, right? It's a ticketing system. You can name your special version. There's two names that you can pick. Typically, we recommend users use _local, and then when we do stuff for customers, we use vendor because we're the vendor. It just tells us that we did this one. But basically, those special names, RT goes and looks for those, and if it sees one of those, it's going to load one and say, "Oh, I might have some overrides for ticket.pm." So it'll look through your file. I think we have a sample of what one of those looks like. Yeah, there it is. So this is what one of those files looks like. So we didn't show it to you, but ticket.pm, as you can imagine, is hundreds and hundreds of lines of code long, right? So this file is not that long. Say all we wanted to do was mess with the set owner. Oh, this one uses the monkey patching. Do you have the subject one? Yeah, the other one. You got a sneak preview of monkey patching, which everybody probably is familiar with. But we're not there yet. We're not that desperate yet. There we go. So before we get to monkey patching, so here's an example of, say there's a method on ticket where it's you just call ticket arrow subject, and then you get the subject of the ticket, right? Makes sense. Say you want to modify that for whatever reason, and in this case, say you want to limit it so that the subject, you're only going to display 40 characters of the subject for whatever reason. So what you can do is in this local PM file that we've created, you copy probably, you don't have to, you could start from scratch, but typically you copy the existing version of subject, put it in your own file, and then you go in and make your change. In this case, this is the custom code. And we typically do things like this where we put comments to say, this is our bit, so that when you do have to compare for future versions, you know what you changed. But you can drop your bit in here, and all you've had to modify is just that one function or method, not the entire file. So it just really reduces the amount of stuff that you need to think about on upgrade, right? You only have to go check the subject method when you upgrade and see if something was changed there, like did we modify anything. It's a much lighter touch in terms of going in rather than just going into librt ticket.pm and just changing it directly there. And again, that file, that ticket underscore local file, is in a separate tree. It's in that local tree where we're not going to mess with it on upgrade. So you're not going to lose your file. Your changes aren't going to get overwritten. So you can see it got chopped off now up here. That bit got chopped off, right? So it's running that special version of the code that we created. But again, very light touch. You just needed to modify that one method. So there's a very clean way to modify that with basically the least amount of change that still gets you what it is that you needed to do. So now what we saw a preview of before, slightly different version of that, but very similar to what we showed before is, and this is where we get into just the flexibility of Perl, and what Perl provides is what's sometimes called monkey patching, which is basically going in, grabbing a copy of an existing method or function, and then overwriting it and saying, no, I'm going to tell you this other implementation that's mine. But because you took a copy, you can still call the original. And typically what this is you can use this when you have cases where before the existing method runs, you want to do something special. Like maybe you want to do some validation, or maybe you want to clean something up, or whatever it is that you want to do. So you can use this method. And I think, if you can show the code, it's probably easier to see with the. So this is the monkey patch. So this is where we're taking, there's a set owner method or function. We're taking a copy of it and sticking it here. And then with this syntax, Perl allows us to override this with a new subroutine that we are defining. But because we grabbed a version of it, we can still call the original down here. So it just allows you to, again, typically do something either right at the beginning where you can run a little bit of code, do your thing, and then call the original, right? Which is still going to call the code that's actually in this case, in RT, the original code. And again, this is fairly immune to upgrades, because whatever we do to set owner, you get the new version when you upgrade, right? Because this is calling whatever the definition is of that new version. So fairly clean way to do that. And often when we use this technique, we're only doing one little thing. Typically, we'll just have a couple lines of code that we're going to run before we then call back to the original. And it's just because we need to put a little shim in there. We need to do something custom when we get started. The other place that sometimes you do this is at the end, right? Right at the beginning or right at the end. After the core thing runs, you want to modify something. You want to do a little tweak. So similar idea. So as long as the basic interface doesn't change, this technique is fairly immune to upgrades as well. So it's fairly clean when you go in and do things. So the last thing that we do when all else has failed, all of those techniques will not do the change that we need to do. There's still a way that you can do it without actually going into RT and modifying the direct code. So again, so that you're in a situation where you can't upgrade. RT has a directory called local, and it sits right alongside in like the main RT base directory, and you can put in there a copy of anything that's in the main RT tree, and that's both the Mason files and the lib files. And anything that's in that local tree, if RT finds something defined there, it's going to use the local version rather than the core version. So again, this is just another, when RT starts up and loads all of its code, it has this built into it that it looks in this local alternate location that allows you to have your own version of the file without having to go in again and change the core RT stuff. And the big advantages of this are that we never touch that directory when we do upgrades. So when you upgrade all the core stuff that gets new files come in, all of your local stuff will still be there. Of all the stuff we've shown, this one is less sort of immune to upgrades, because typically when you do this, you've copied an entire file from inside the RT tree, stuck it in this local version, and then you've messed with it. So you're still, on any upgrade, you're still gonna have to diff the two and basically see what did we change, what did you change, and then kind of probably copy the file again and re-implement your changes. So it's the least immune to changes on upgrade, but it's in an alternate location so that you kind of have like a checklist of what are the things that we messed with, right? If you modified things directly, it's not always easy to figure out what did we change. I have no idea, right? Like over, maybe a year, maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe it wasn't just you, have been in to the RT tree and mess with a bunch of things. Well, what have you changed? Now, if you put, say, all of RT in Git, maybe you've got Git and you can just go through commit by commit. That'd be good. That's a good idea anyway, but then you have some sort of checklist. But it's still a challenge to find all of those modifications all over the place. If you use this local technique, basically you're just going to go through all of your local files. Those are the things you changed, right? Because those are the things you copied. There's your list of things to go look at in RT and say, okay, what changed? What changed? You just diff each one as you go through. So we use every other technique before we do this because of what I just explained, because basically every upgrade you are going to have a little bit of work to do. But occasionally people want something super, super custom, and like this is kind of the only way to do it. So, and I think you showed while I was talking, right? Yeah. So I think Jason went in and showed a copy of a complete file that did change things completely, just to show that if there's a local file there, it will load that and it will use that. So the whole point of all of these techniques and all of these kind of hooks that are built in all over the place is to keep you from messing with the core code, because we've had so many cases over the years. We do upgrades for people and we go in and they say, things are so heavily modified, like we have, no idea, like we don't think you can upgrade us, right? And we do a big diff and we're like, yeah. Or more commonly, we go in and we say, hey, has anybody, done any modifications to your RT? Nope, absolutely vanilla. Nobody's ever changed it. That's right. Okay, so I hear the laughing. Everyone knows how that story goes, right? We diff it against the version that they say and say, well, somebody was in there. Did you have somebody who was good with code maybe here for some period of time? Maybe they don't work here anymore. And we find all of those changes in there. And then typically what we do is when we get those, we say, we're going to move all of your stuff into an extension for you, a company extension. And we use, again, all of these techniques. We start at the simplest and we do the least intrusive that we can to try to retain the changes that they put in there. So that's the whole goal of all that stuff. And then here's just some links and resources and things. That's us. We do stuff with RT, and then I think that's it, right?
Yeah. Now go forth and make your products hackable.
Yeah.
Immune to upgrades.
So, yeah. Questions or thoughts? What config things have you used that we don't have? Yeah.
So it looks like you're allowing people to execute arbitrary Perl code.
Yes.
What considerations for security do we have?
So the question was, it seems like from that box that you showed that had arbitrary Perl code in it, that we're allowing people to execute arbitrary Perl code, and that's absolutely right. So to even see that screen, you have to be a super user in RT. There's writes on every user, every logged in user, so to even see that screen. And then there's a separate write called execute code that you can actually take away. So there you can expose people to certain other things, but there's a specific write that just hides those boxes. So if you're uncomfortable with that, or you're passing out admin to more people that you are kind of like not fully trusted, or maybe you just don't think that they should have that responsibility, there's a way to turn that off, and then those boxes don't appear. Yeah. Other questions? Or again, thoughts, other ways that people have exposed configuration or deal with this? Yeah.
So with a lot of configuration options, I imagine the testing will be some kind of back-end. Like what kind of effort I put into there to make it easier to use?
Yeah. So the question was, with so many configuration options, you basically introduced all these different permutations, and that sounds like a nightmare to test, right? How do you test that every different permutation doesn't work with other things? Basically, we use automated testing, Perl's automated testing tool. So we have a giant test suite. I think there's 30,000?
Almost 40 now.
Almost 40,000 tests that RT has. If you go look at our GitHub, maybe you could pull it up. We have GitHub Actions set up. Every time we push a branch, it kicks off our full test suite against, I think right now we have 4 different permutations set up. So there's like, RT has like a plaque, like an RT server that can run, and it can run against SQLite. So that's one. And then it does another one with Apache and MariaDB, and it does another one with MySQL 8, and then does another one with Postgres. So we support Oracle, but you can't have a free Oracle that just runs in GitHub because it's Oracle. So every time you push a branch, that kicks off. We have a Slack channel, so everybody know if your branch, if anything failed anywhere. So yeah, basically we have a really big automated test suite that goes through. And actually, your question reminded me of another thing that I wanted to mention. It's also just a challenge for users when you have so many configuration options, right? So one of the questions that sometimes that we have and we all talk about is when there's a new thing, and maybe it came in from a customer or a user, somebody wrote in and they say, hey, we'd really like this thing to have this other behavior, right? And we have this session like, oh, another config option, right? It's like there's so many. So what we discuss is sort of how likely is it that people want to use that, right? Like how high level of a feature is that? And should it be a new configuration option? And we don't add them lightly just because there's just so many. So sometimes what we'll do is if it's so the dropdown, the menu limit example that we showed is a really good example. So there's one config option for all of RT at the top level. And that's just called dropdown menu limit or whatever. And you can set that through the UI that we showed or in the file that we showed. That will change the dropdowns all over RT. So the 50 or 25 or 55 or whatever it is that you want. But there's many different dropdowns all throughout RT. And we want to make a configuration option for every different dropdown, right? Owner dropdown, article dropdown, like that's crazy, right? That's too much configuration. But right around where those dropdowns are rendered, we have callbacks. So that if you set the default for all of RT to 50, but then for your owner dropdowns, you actually want that one to be 75, you can go add a callback. So it's a little bit of code. It's not configuration, strictly speaking, but you can just go add a callback, and as by reference, it gets past that dropdown menu limit, and you can change it and it's only going to run for the owner one, right? So the rest of RT continues to use your default configuration option, but we have a callback there to be able to modify if you just want to tweak that. And that's how we kind of weigh. Because if we didn't do stuff like that, that configuration page would be twice as long because you'd have instrument every single thing in the application. It's just too much. So yeah, and we have debates, whether it should be a top
Almost every week.
Yeah, whether that should that be a top level configuration? No, it's too many. So yeah. Anything else? Other questions? Good. All right. Excellent. Thank you.